Hi, my name is Mikayla. I am 19 years old, and I am a second-year student at Fraser University, and I have a ADHD. Growing up with a ADHD, I always felt I had to work harder than my peers to end up at the same place. Learning to me was like running a marathon with ankle weights on. I was given the same finish line, but I ended up there slower, and with a lot more effort than those I started with. In this video, we will be discussing ways that educators can foster active learning for students with ADHD. Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, or ADHD, is a type of neurodevelopmental disorder that is typically characterized with maladaptive levels of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity, or a combination of these 61 Dozois. ADHD students typically get a bad rep. They can be seen as disruptive, lazy, and unfocused. However, this is not necessarily the student's fault. ADHD is actually present within people due to an imbalance of neurotransmitters as well as different abnormalities within the brain. ADHD students typically show an imbalance of the neurotransmitter dopamine, as well as a difference in the basal ganglia and the prefrontal cortex. These areas are important as they actually play very large roles in learning, memory, emotional regulation, and executive functioning. When these areas are inhibited, it is no wonder that problems may arise with traditional learning procedures. Did you know that ADHD students are more likely to drop out of high school than a neurotypical learner? And did you know that 50% of those with ADHD are comorbid with another disorder? Having ADHD is difficult, but it is not impossible. And with the proper support, ADHD students are able to flourish. ADHD is one of those things that has become a sort of joke within the media. In almost every sitcom, you can find at least one character with discernible traits of ADHD. While ADHD characters are typically well-meaning, they are not necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed, though not a student. Phil Dunphy from the show Modern Family is a great example of ADHD within media. He is repeatedly seen doing dangerous stunts, counterintuitive tasks, or making senseless mistakes.
Listen to these symptoms of ADHD and tell me it's not loose.
Alex.
Easily distracted by irrelevant stimuli. Often impulsively abandons one task for another.
That's where I left those.
A tendency to act without regard to consequences, often at the expense of personal safety. Having accidents
Okay,
more
I think
often...
that's enough, Alex. We've got it. Phil, honey, you okay?
Yeah. Remember those sunglasses I couldn't find? Bingo.
Other characters that are portrayed with possible ADHD include Andy Dwyer from Parks and Rec, Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother, Jake Peralta from Brooklyn 99, and Bart Simpson from The Simpsons. Students with ADHD are typically seen as ditzy, dumb, or reckless, pushed further through these media representations, and their roles in the formulation of schemas within educators. A schema is your brain's filing system. It is where you take in new information and categorize it with other stimuli. Schemas are an excellent tool in the actual understanding of the world, connecting different ideas together. However, schemas are also a major reason as to why stereotypes exist, because schemas are created from exposure. When people are exposed to these unflattering caricatures of ADHD, that is what ADHD becomes synonymous with in our heads. While this alone isn't necessarily harmful, the after effects of what can come once these schemas are formed are the self-fulfilling prophecies, the idea that we will treat people according to our schemas, therefore leading them to act in a way which supports the current schema. So imagine you are at a party and you are introduced to your friend Molly's good friend Trish. You have only heard good things about Trish. So when you are introduced to each other, you are very positive and outgoing, which leads Trish to be positive and outgoing back. Now imagine at the same party, you meet Molly's ex-boyfriend Chuck. And while you have never met Chuck, you've been told that he can be argumentative and rude. This leads you to treat him in a way which is almost combative and rude. which he then reciprocates. This is the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. This idea is very important within education, as everyone has their own schemas, which result in their own self-fulfilling prophecies. When teachers begin to see ADHD through a lens of comedy, it often makes them dismissive of ADHD students and their experiences. Seeing them as rowdy and disruptive students with an inability to learn, this then leads teachers to then react to these ADHD students in a deficit-oriented approach. A deficit-oriented approach is described in a 2025 study by Sabine Weiss et al. As a type of approach that focuses on the disruption and suspension of disturbing behavior through negative punishments, such as removing a child from the classroom. While this approach leads to short-term gain, it very quickly becomes ineffective and can push the punished students into an outsider role within the classroom, further stigmatizing ADHD for other children. This type of approach is often looked at as an initial reaction to stop behavior. But what other ways can educators approach these situations that will be more effective for both the student and the class as a whole? When dealing with ADHD learners, it is important to ensure you are focusing on targeted approach practices. A targeted approach practice is a type of interference where a student's behavior is seen and redirected to a new task. It can be extremely difficult for an ADHD student to focus on a lesson, but this does not mean that they do not want to learn. They simply may not have the current capacity to pay attention. In my personal experience, having ADHD is like having a TV constantly playing in the back of your mind, but the TV is randomly flipping through different channels, making it impossible to focus on one show. For a lot of ADHD learners, the best way to turn off the TV is to get up and begin a new task. In classroom settings, this can be easily facilitated by simply allowing movement breaks for ADD students. When teachers notice that an ADHD student may be particularly restless or impulsive, they can help them to recenter by instructing them to run laps around a track. While this may seem like a simple fix, it is extremely effective for not only ADHD learners, but neurotypical learners as well. A reason as to why this integration of both neurodivergent and neurotypical students is so important is due to the idea of polis in schools. Polis is a term that is originally derived from the word for city-states in ancient Greece. This idea of polis within education was created by German educational theorists after they were influenced by the work of John Dewey. The original idea of polis is that one's topographic location can help to represent one's understanding of a political space. 310 Schneider. That the community you are within eventually merges with your identity, and you all begin to take on similar thought processes and perspectives. Sort of like how the people in provinces such as Alberta are more conservative compared to those in British Columbia. When looking at polis within education, this definition shifts a little bit. Polis in schools is the shared community responsibility and imagination within students. A crucial point of polis within schools is the recognition that each student has a fundamental right to agency and participation inside the classroom, and that these rights are not being honored unless the barriers that prevent student education are being removed. 319 Schneider. When schools integrate the concept of polis, they are moving forward with ideas of acceptance, collaboration, and mutual respect, seeing ADHD as more than a deficit, but as a tool. The collaborative approach of polis also allows the destigmatization of ADHD within classes, as it propels the intention that each student is a learner, and each learner learns differently, building up communities of support rather than a community of competition. In the end, the idea of polis within schools is used to show that a learning space must be cultivated for the learners, and that the space must be a place where every student, even if ADHD ones, can flourish, not just be included. Flourishing versus inclusion is an important discussion within any education conversation. However, it is extra prevalent when dealing with non-neurotypical students. To be inclusive is important, but it is only half the battle. To have an inclusive classroom, Teachers provide each and every student with the same resources and expend the same amount of time on each student individually. To have a flourishing classroom, teachers are recognizing different difficulties within students and giving each one the resources needed to help them thrive within education. To recognize the differences in flourishing versus inclusion is to recognize that education is not one size fits all, and that adjustments must be taken. ADHD students may have difficulties in sit-down lecture-based classrooms. However, they often thrive in more movement-based hands-on learning. When teachers are able to recognize the differences within learning, they can make the required changes to make learning not only equal for each student, but equitable for each student. A great technique that teachers can use to help support ADHD students is scaffolding and fading. Scaffolding is a powerful tool for neurodiverse students, as it focuses on the idea that assignments are broken down into more manageable parts. This destruction and reconstruction of project timelines can be very effective for ADHD students, as the additional guidance can keep them from feeling overwhelmed and overburdened with lack of guidance. Fading is another important tool, as it involves the slow regression of help from educators. When teachers are constantly around, students can become over-reliant on their help. So fading is the concept that focuses on the eventual removal of this help, essentially handing over the keys of the car to the learner, so that they are able to strategize and problem-solve independently. When dealing with a disorder such as ADHD, it is very important to learn coping strategies from those with the lived experiences of being an ADHD student. Carolyn Odom, a student at Mountain Brook Junior High School, recounted her own experiences with ADHD and the difficulties it brought when studying for tests. In one instance, Odom recalled how a teacher had told her that she simply hadn't studied hard enough, despite the fact that Odom had studied for multiple hours a night in the days leading up to the exam. While this shocked her at first, Odom said that when she found out about her ADHD, she was able to find strategies to help with her learning. One of the strategies proposed was to have a class-mandated note clear out. This is effective in helping ADHD students keep track of their work, as well as keeping it clean. An organized environment which is conducive to all learners. Odom also proposed that writing out and highlighting key information can be effective for counteracting the weaker working memory in ADHD students, which often results in the forgetting of information and instructions. Project-based learning has also shown to be the more effective educational tool to not only ADHD students, but to all students. Project-based learning allows students to connect with the material, making it something that can be applied to real life situations instead of something that will only ever be read about. Catherine Lizardo is another person who has taken to sharing her experiences with ADHD and how it has impacted her life. After her child was diagnosed with ADHD, Lizardo began to reframe her thinking of ADHD. Despite having it herself, it took her child's diagnosis for Lizardo to recognize ADHD as a superpower. Lizardo also discusses the importance of asking why, opposed to the historical approach on memorization. By asking why, students are engaging with the information and beginning to develop profound learning. In the end, the key to building and fostering active learning for students with ADHD is to simply care about the students. ADHD students may perceive and interact with information differently from neurotypical learners. However, they still want to learn and deserve the right to a proper education. Singling out ADHD students only alienated them more from the class. But by enacting entire class-wide changes such as scheduled movement breaks, teachers are encouraging productivity in all learners. ADHD students are students. And through the proper use of different ideas such as scaffolding and fading, and the shift to a more polis-centered classroom, educators are creating spaces where all learners are not only treated as equal, but given the opportunities to flourish.